I never thought washing dishes in the executive cafeteria would teach me more about business than my MBA ever did. But as I stood there, scraping leftover salmon off gold-rimmed plates, listening to billion-dollar deals being discussed just feet away, I had no idea that everything was about to change in ways that would shock everyone who ever looked down on me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maya Chen, and 3 years ago, I was desperate. Fresh out of business school with crushing student debt and zero connections, I took the only job I could find at Meridian Industries, one of the largest tech conglomerates in Silicon Valley. The position was kitchen staff in their executive dining facility on the 42nd floor. My job description was simple: wash dishes, clean tables, and stay invisible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, armed with a master's degree in business administration, scrubbing the same plates that executives used during their power lunches. But I needed the money, and frankly, I was grateful for any opportunity to get inside a company like Meridian, even if it meant starting at the very bottom. What I didn't expect were the daily humiliations that came with the territory. The worst offender was Bradley Whitmore, the vice president of strategic development, a man in his early 40s with perfectly styled silver hair and an ego to match. Bradley made it his personal mission to remind me exactly where I belonged in the corporate hierarchy. Every day around noon, Bradley would stride into the executive dining room with his usual entourage of middle management yes-men. He had this habit of snapping his fingers at me like I was a pet, calling out orders without even looking in my direction. "Hey, dishwasher girl, clear table 6, he'd bark while continuing his conversation about quarterly projections. When I moved too slowly for his liking, he'd make comments loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people are just born for menial work, I suppose. Not everyone can handle the complexities of real business. His favorite target was my educational background. Somehow, word had gotten around that I had an MBA, and Bradley found this endlessly amusing. "Can you believe it, gentlemen? Our little kitchen helper has a business degree." I guess they're giving those out to anyone these days. His cronies would chuckle on cue, their laughter echoing through the pristine dining room while I kept my head down and continued clearing their mess. But Bradley wasn't alone in his cruelty. Jessica Martinez, the director of human resources, was perhaps even worse in her subtle way. She had this talent for delivering cutting remarks with a sweet smile that made them somehow more painful than Bradley's obvious aggression. "Oh, Maya, still here, I see? You know, there are plenty of other opportunities out there for someone with your unique skill set. Have you considered looking into positions more suited to your capabilities?" She'd say this while handing me her dirty napkin, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light as she dismissed me with a wave. The third member of their unofficial torment committee was David Kim, the chief financial officer. David was methodical in his disdain, treating me like a fascinating case study in failure. He'd often bring up my situation during his lunch conversations, speaking about me in the third person even when I was standing right there. It's really quite fascinating from a psychological perspective. The inability to recognize one's own limitations, the persistence in pursuing goals clearly beyond one's reach. Classic case of misplaced ambition. His colleagues would nod thoughtfully, as if I were a specimen under a microscope rather than a human being trying to make ends meet. The daily routine became a study in endurance. I'd arrive at 5 in the morning to prep the kitchen before the breakfast service, spending my days bent over industrial sinks while listening to conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and strategic partnerships. The executives would discuss million-dollar contracts while I scraped their leftover eggs Benedict into the garbage disposal. They talked about international expansions while I polished their coffee cups. They debated market strategies while I mopped up their spilled wine. What hurt most wasn't just the direct insults, but the way they talked about me when they thought I couldn't hear. Bradley would regale his lunch companions with stories about the delusional dishwasher who thought she belonged in their world. Jessica would shake her head sadly and comment on how some people simply couldn't accept their station in life. David would analyze my psychological profile like I was a failed business case study he was presenting to investors. The worst part was how their behavior trickled down to other employees. Soon, junior managers were treating me with the same dismissive attitude, mimicking their superiors' casual cruelty. Administrative assistants would look through me like I was furniture. Even some of the other kitchen staff began to distance themselves, afraid that associating with the failed MBA might somehow damage their own standing. My direct supervisor, Carol Jenkins, was the only person who treated me with basic human decency. A woman in her 60s who had worked her way up from entry-level positions, Carol understood struggle in a way the executives never could. She'd often pull me aside after particularly brutal lunch services, offering quiet words of encouragement. "Don't let them break your spirit, honey." I've seen a lot of people come and go in this company, and the ones who think they're untouchable usually have the furthest to fall. The conversations I overheard that evening revealed cracks in Meridian Industries that ran deeper than anyone realized. Board member Maya Chen, no relation despite our shared surname, was expressing serious concerns about the company's direction under current leadership. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had built empires from nothing, and her words cut through the polite corporate pleasantries that usually dominated these gatherings. "The numbers don't lie, Robert," she was saying to the chairman. "Our market share has declined 18% over the past 2 years, and our competitor analysis shows we're falling behind in every major sector. The strategic initiatives being proposed by current management are rehashing decade-old approaches that have already failed in other companies." I pressed closer to the serving window, my heart racing as I realized the magnitude of what I was hearing. Another board member, someone with a thick German accent whom I later learned was Klaus Weber, joined the conversation with equally damning observations. "The proposal from Strategic Development is particularly concerning. Bradley Whitmore's expansion plan into Southeast Asian markets shows a fundamental misunderstanding of regional business cultures and regulatory environments. Any first-year business student could identify the fatal flaws in his market entry strategy." My hands trembled as I processed this information. The same Bradley who had mocked my education was apparently presenting strategies that international business experts found laughably inadequate. The irony was so sharp it physically hurt, but I forced myself to keep listening. Victoria's voice dropped to a more confidential tone. "What troubles me most is the lack of fresh thinking in upper management. They're operating with strategies from 2015, while our competitors are revolutionizing entire industries. We need innovative minds, people who understand emerging markets and can think beyond traditional frameworks." That's when Klaus mentioned something that made my blood run cold and my hopes soar simultaneously. "The CEO succession plan is becoming urgent. Robert's retirement timeline has moved up, and the board needs to identify candidates who can navigate the challenges ahead. Current leadership has demonstrated they're simply not equipped for the transformation this company requires." Robert's voice, weary with the weight of leadership, confirmed what Klaus had suggested. "I've been running Meridian for 32 years, and I can see the writing on the wall. Technology is evolving faster than our current team can adapt. We need someone who understands both traditional business principles and cutting-edge innovation. Someone who can bridge the gap between where we are and where we need to be." The conversation continued late into the evening, revealing layer after layer of dysfunction within Meridian's executive structure. Jessica Martinez's human resources strategies were described as antiquated and potentially discriminatory by a board member from the legal committee. David Kim's financial projections were called overly conservative to the point of hindering growth by the chief investment officer. But it was the discussion about corporate culture that hit closest to home. Victoria's voice carried genuine concern as she addressed what she called quote 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 quote. A company's character is reflected in how it treats its most vulnerable employees. The reports I've been receiving about executive behavior toward support staff are deeply troubling. This kind of culture kills innovation and drives away talent at every level. I realized then that someone had been reporting the daily humiliations I endured, the casual cruelty that Bradley, Jessica, and David seemed to consider normal business behavior. Someone on the board was paying attention to how I was being treated, and they weren't pleased about it. Over the following weeks, I developed a routine of strategic eavesdropping. My position in the kitchen provided perfect cover for gathering intelligence about Meridian's internal struggles. The executives continued their lunch meetings, blissfully unaware that their invisible dishwasher was absorbing every detail of their business discussions, noting every strategic misstep, every missed opportunity, every sign of their growing irrelevance in a rapidly changing market. Bradley's arrogance reached new heights during this period. Emboldened by what he believed was his inevitable promotion to a senior leadership role, he began treating me with even greater contempt. He'd intentionally knock over glasses near my station, forcing me to clean up the mess while he laughed with his colleagues. "Oops, Butterfingers," he'd say with mock concern. "Better get that cleaned up quickly. Wouldn't want our little MBA to think she's too good for honest work." Jessica's psychological warfare became more sophisticated as well. She began scheduling, quote, professional development sessions during my lunch breaks, ostensibly to help me, quote, explore more suitable career options. These sessions were thinly veiled attempts to push me toward leaving Meridian entirely. She'd show me job listings for retail positions and food service roles at other companies, speaking in the patronizing tone one might use with a child who had been caught playing dress-up in adult clothes. "Now, Maya, I know you have big dreams. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is accept our limitations. These positions I found would be perfect for someone with your practical skills. Much less stressful than trying to compete in environments where you're clearly out of your depth." David's approach was more methodical, but equally cruel. He began using me as a cautionary tale in his presentations to junior staff, though he was careful never to mention me by name directly. I'd overhear him in the hallway explaining to new hires about the dangers of unrealistic career expectations and the importance of knowing one's place in the organizational hierarchy. "We have employees here who refuse to accept their role," he'd say in his clinical tone. "They waste energy pursuing positions they're fundamentally unqualified for, instead of excelling in the roles where they could actually contribute value. It's a form of resource misallocation that damages both individual and corporate efficiency." But while my tormentors were busy congratulating themselves on their cleverness, I was building something they couldn't see. Every conversation I overheard, every strategic document left carelessly on dining tables, every private phone call made within earshot of the kitchen, became part of a comprehensive understanding of Meridian's challenges and opportunities. I began staying late every night, not just to clean, but to research. Using the company's own computers after hours, I dove deep into market analysis, competitor strategies, and emerging industry trends. My MBA training, dismissed so casually by the executives, proved invaluable as I connected dots they had missed, identified patterns they had overlooked, and developed solutions to problems they didn't even realize existed. The breakthrough came when I discovered a regulatory filing that Bradley's team had misinterpreted. They were planning a major investment in a technology sector that was about to face significant government restrictions, a fact clearly outlined in publicly available congressional testimony that apparently none of them had bothered to read. Their multi-million-dollar strategic initiative was built on a foundation that would crumble within months. At the same time, I identified an opportunity in sustainable technology integration that aligned perfectly with emerging environmental regulations and shifting consumer preferences. The market research was clear, the regulatory environment was favorable, and the timing was perfect. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking the board had been desperately seeking. But I was still just the dishwasher, invisible and ignored. No one would listen to strategic insights from someone they viewed as fundamentally incapable of understanding business complexity. The knowledge I had gained felt like a secret weapon I couldn't use, a treasure map written in a language my supposed superiors refused to acknowledge I could read. The situation reached its crescendo during the company's annual leadership retreat. Held at an exclusive resort in Napa Valley, the retreat was designed to showcase Meridian's executive team to major investors and potential partners. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Carol had arranged for me to work the catering service as a way to earn extra money during what would normally be a slow period. Watching Bradley present his flawed Southeast Asian expansion strategy to a room full of international investors was like watching a car accident in slow motion. His complete misunderstanding of local business customs, regulatory requirements, and competitive landscapes was so obvious that I could see confusion and concern spreading across the faces of his audience. Jessica's presentation on human resources innovation was equally disastrous, featuring outdated diversity initiatives and employee engagement strategies that had been proven ineffective by multiple academic studies. David's financial projections were so conservative that several investors openly questioned whether Meridian had any real growth potential. But the most painful moment came when Maya Chen asked a direct question about Meridian's plans for adapting to emerging market trends. The three executives looked at each other like deer caught in headlights, their silence stretching uncomfortably as they realized they had no meaningful answer to offer. That night, as I cleaned up after their failed presentations, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop being invisible. But even Carol couldn't shield me from the constant stream of humiliation. There were days when I'd lock myself in the supply closet during my break, fighting back tears as I questioned every decision that had led me to this point. My student loan payments were due every month, a constant reminder of the education that these people seemed to think was worthless. My tiny studio apartment felt like a prison, and my social life had dwindled to nothing as I worked double shifts just to keep my head above water. The breaking point came during Meridian's quarterly board meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The executive dining room was bustling with activity as board members from around the world gathered for their annual strategic session. I was tasked with serving coffee and pastries during their breaks, moving silently between tables while trying to remain invisible. Bradley was in his element, schmoozing with board members and showcasing his latest strategic initiatives. When he spotted me refilling coffee cups near the presentation area, he couldn't resist the opportunity to showcase his wit to his distinguished audience. Gentlemen, ladies, allow me to introduce you to our resident case study in misguided ambition. Maya here has an MBA, can you believe it? Yet here she is, serving coffee to people who actually understand business. It's really quite poetic, don't you think? The room fell silent for a moment, and I felt every eye turn toward me. My cheeks burned with shame as I continued my task, pretending not to hear the uncomfortable chuckles that followed. But something inside me had shifted. As I walked back to the kitchen, my hands trembling with suppressed rage, I made a decision that would change everything. That night, I stayed late in the executive dining room. Not to clean, but to listen. The board members had continued their discussions over dinner, and their voices carried clearly through the thin walls separating the kitchen from the dining area. What I heard would have shocked Bradley, Jessica, and David if they had been paying attention instead of basking in their own superiority. The opportunity came at 3 a.m. I was finishing the deep cleaning of the retreat center's conference room when I noticed Maya Chen had left her laptop open on the main presentation table. The screen showed an email draft addressed to the entire board of directors, with the subject line, "Urgent strategic concerns regarding current leadership." My heart pounded as I realized this was my moment. Not to snoop, but to finally speak. I closed her laptop carefully and waited by the elevator banks, knowing that Victoria was an early riser who always reviewed her emails before the morning sessions began. When she emerged from the elevator at 5:30, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, I stepped forward with trembling hands and a folder I had prepared over months of careful research. "Ms. Chen, I apologize for approaching you like this, but I have information that could save Meridian from making a catastrophic mistake." She paused, her sharp eyes taking in my catering uniform and the professional portfolio in my hands. Most executives would have dismissed me immediately, but Victoria had built her reputation on recognizing value regardless of its packaging. "You're the young woman from the kitchen staff, aren't you? I remember seeing you during the presentations yesterday. What kind of information?" My voice steadied as I opened the folder, revealing months of meticulous analysis. Bradley Whitmore's Southeast Asian expansion plan is based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about regulatory environments in target markets. The technology sector he's planning to invest in will face significant government restrictions within the next 6 months, based on pending legislation that's currently in committee. Victoria's eyebrows rose as she took the document from my hands, scanning the first page with the intensity of someone who had spent decades evaluating business proposals. This is remarkably thorough analysis. Where did you acquire this level of insight into regulatory affairs? I have an MBA in international business, and I've been researching emerging market trends during my off hours. But more importantly, I've identified an alternative opportunity that aligns with both regulatory changes and consumer preference shifts towards sustainable technology integration. What happened next changed the trajectory of my entire life. Victoria spent the next hour reviewing my comprehensive market analysis, competitor assessment, and strategic recommendations. Her questions were sharp and probing, testing not just my research but my understanding of complex business dynamics. This sustainable technology initiative, she said, pointing to my detailed implementation timeline, you've accounted for supply chain logistics, regulatory approval processes, and competitive positioning. This level of strategic thinking is exactly what our current leadership team has been unable to provide. By 7 a.m, Victoria had made a decision that would send shockwaves through Meridian's executive hierarchy. She called an emergency board meeting, rescheduling the day's planned presentations to address what she termed critical strategic intelligence that requires immediate attention. The conference room that had witnessed Bradley's fumbling presentation the previous day now became the stage for my vindication. Board members filed in with cups of coffee and expressions of curiosity, wondering what could be so urgent as to disrupt their carefully planned agenda. Victoria introduced me with words I had never dared imagine hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Maya Chen, whose strategic analysis has identified both a significant threat to our current expansion plans and a remarkable opportunity for sustainable growth. Her insights demonstrate the kind of innovative thinking we've been seeking for Meridian's future leadership. The next 2 hours were a blur of presentations, questions, and gradually dawning recognition among the board members that they had been looking for strategic vision in all the wrong places. My analysis of regulatory trends, market opportunities, and competitive landscapes painted a picture so compelling that several board members began taking notes. Klaus Weber was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. This level of strategic acumen is exactly what Meridian needs to navigate the challenges ahead. The depth of research and quality of recommendations far exceed anything we've seen from current management. But the real shock was yet to come. Robert, the chairman who had spoken of retirement, asked the question that would reshape everything. Maya, you've clearly demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking and business insight. Would you be interested in joining Meridian's executive team in a leadership capacity? Before I could respond, the conference room doors burst open. Bradley, Jessica, and David strode in with the confidence of people who believed they owned the space they occupied. Bradley's voice boomed across the room with his characteristic arrogance. Sorry we're late, board members. We heard there was an emergency session and wanted to make sure we were available to address any concerns about our strategic initiatives. The silence that followed was deafening. Bradley's eyes swept the room, taking in the board members' expressions and finally landing on me standing at the head of the conference table with my presentation materials spread across the surface. What is the kitchen staff doing in a board meeting? Jessica asked with barely concealed disgust, her voice dripping with the same condescension she had used to dismiss me countless times. David's analytical mind processed the scene more quickly, and I could see the moment when recognition dawned in his eyes. This is highly irregular. Support staff shouldn't have access to confidential strategic discussions. Victoria's voice cut through their protests with surgical precision. Maya has just presented the most comprehensive strategic analysis this board has seen in years. Her insights have identified critical flaws in current management proposals and outlined opportunities that could transform Meridian's market position. Bradley's face flushed red as he realized the implications. That's impossible. She's a dishwasher. She doesn't have the qualifications or experience to understand complex business strategy. Actually, Robert interjected, his voice carrying the weight of decades in corporate leadership, Maya has an MBA in international business and has demonstrated strategic thinking capabilities that far exceed what we've seen from current executive presentations. The room temperature seemed to drop as the three executives processed this information. Jessica's carefully maintained composure cracked as she realized that the woman she had spent months trying to push out of the company had just impressed the entire board of directors. Klaus spoke next, his German accent adding gravity to words that would haunt my former tormentors. The board has been concerned about leadership effectiveness for some time. Maya's presentation has highlighted not only strategic opportunities, but also the limitations of current management approaches. What followed was the most satisfying professional moment of my life. One by one, board members began questioning Bradley, Jessica, and David about fundamental aspects of their strategies that my analysis had exposed as deeply flawed. Their confident facades crumbled as they struggled to answer basic questions about market research, regulatory compliance, and competitive positioning. Bradley attempted to deflect by attacking my credibility. This is clearly some kind of elaborate prank. You can't seriously be considering strategic advice from someone whose job is washing dishes. But Victoria's response silenced him completely. Maya's job title is irrelevant. Her analysis is sophisticated, well-researched, and precisely aligned with market realities that your team has consistently overlooked. The question isn't her qualifications, but why your strategic initiatives have failed to demonstrate this level of insight. The meeting concluded with an announcement that would reverberate through Meridian's corporate culture for years to come. Robert stood and addressed the room with the formality befitting a historic moment. Effective immediately, the board is restructuring Meridian's leadership team. Maya Chen will be appointed as Chief Strategy Officer, reporting directly to the board of directors. Her first responsibility will be implementing the sustainable technology initiative she has outlined today. The words hung in the air like thunder. Chief Strategy Officer. A position that placed me above Bradley, Jessica, and David in the corporate hierarchy. The same people who had spent years treating me like I was incapable of understanding basic business concepts would now be reporting to me. But the board wasn't finished. Victoria delivered the final blow with clinical precision. Additionally, the board has lost confidence in current senior management's ability to execute strategic initiatives effectively. We will be conducting a comprehensive review of all executive positions, with particular attention to leadership effectiveness and cultural contribution. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jessica's perfect composure finally shattered completely, her face pale with shock. David's analytical mind seemed to short-circuit as he processed the reality that the woman he had dismissed as a psychological case study was now his superior. 3 months later, I moved into the corner office on the 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley and a view that stretched to the San Francisco Bay. Bradley had been quietly reassigned to a regional sales position in Cleveland. Jessica had taken early retirement after the board's cultural review found multiple instances of discriminatory behavior. David had been demoted to senior analyst, his conservative financial projections no longer trusted for strategic planning. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months after my promotion, when the sustainable technology initiative I had proposed generated Meridian's highest quarterly revenues in company history. The same strategy that Bradley, Jessica, and David had never imagined possible became the foundation for Meridian's transformation into an industry leader. Carol, my former supervisor who had shown me kindness during my darkest days, was promoted to Director of Operations. She stopped by my office regularly, not to deliver orders, but to share stories about how the company culture had transformed since the leadership changes. "You know what I love most about all this?" she said during one of our coffee meetings. "It's not that you proved them wrong. It's that you proved yourself right. You never let them convince you that you were less than you knew you were." As I sat in my executive chair, reviewing strategic proposals from teams across the globe, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The humiliation, the daily cruelty, the moments when I questioned my own worth, all of it had led to this moment of complete vindication. Sometimes I still walked past the executive dining room, now managed by a team that treated all employees with respect and dignity. The gold-rimmed plates were still there, but they no longer represented a barrier between me and my aspirations. They were simply dishes, cleaned by people whose worth wasn't determined by their job titles, but by their character and potential. The corner office came with many perks: but none more satisfying than the knowledge that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle, no matter how powerful the people trying to hold you back. Bradley, Jessica, and David had taught me an invaluable lesson, though not the one they intended. They showed me that true strength isn't about putting others down to lift yourself up, but about rising so high that their opinions become irrelevant. And every morning when I arrived at work, walking past the kitchen where I had once scrubbed their plates and absorbed their insults, I remembered the most important truth of all. Success isn't just about reaching your goals. It's about proving that those who tried to limit your potential were wrong about everything that truly matters. 2 years have passed since that transformative board meeting, and Meridian Industries has become unrecognizable from the company I first entered as a desperate dishwasher. Under my strategic leadership, we've expanded into 12 new markets, acquired 3 innovative startups, and our stock price has increased by 240%. The Sustainable Technology Division 1 proposed now generates 43% of our total revenue. Last week, I received a LinkedIn message from Bradley. He was writing from his regional office in Cleveland, asking if there might be any opportunities for him to return to headquarters in a consulting capacity. His tone was humble, almost pleading, a stark contrast to the arrogant executive who once snapped his fingers at me like I was his personal servant. I responded professionally, suggesting he work with our external recruitment firm if he was interested in exploring future opportunities. Jessica reached out through a mutual contact, hoping to schedule a meeting about potential collaboration between her new consulting business and Meridian's Human Resources Transformation Initiative. The irony was exquisite. The woman who had spent months trying to convince me I belonged in retail was now seeking my approval for business partnerships. David's situation was perhaps the most poignant. During our quarterly review meetings, he sits across from me presenting financial analyses that require my approval before implementation. His recommendations have improved significantly since working under my leadership, and I've noticed a newfound humility in his approach to strategic planning. The psychological case study he once considered me to be had become his mentor in understanding true business acumen. But the real victory isn't in their downfall or my rise. It's in the culture we've built at Meridian, where every employee is valued for their potential, rather than judged by their current position. We've implemented mentorship programs, educational advancement opportunities, and most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of workplace bullying I once endured. Carol often jokes that I should write a book about my experience, but honestly, living it once was enough. The view from the executive suite is beautiful, but the journey to get here taught me that respect isn't something you demand based on your title. It's something you earn through your actions, your character, and your willingness to see potential in places others refuse to look. Sometimes late at night, when I'm reviewing international market reports in my corner office, I think about that scared young woman scrubbing dishes, while executives mocked her dreams just feet away. She never could have imagined that those same dishes would one day symbolize not her limitations, but the foundation of her greatest triumph. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.